Hi, friends. Welcome to the Mobile Bev Pros podcast, a podcast dedicated to providing mobile bar and event professionals with the information they need to succeed. I'm your host, business coach, and founder of the Mobile Bar Academy, Sarah Murphy. In each episode, the Mobile Bev Pros team will bring you industry experts, information, anecdotes, and opinions with the goal of assisting you in building a profitable, sustainable, and successful business that supports you in creating wealth. I'm excited to share with you today's episode, so let's get started. One of the spaces and places that we really enjoy playing in is this balance between marketing and branding through the lens of using both logic, but also the subconscious brain, which is oftentimes not given as much play time when it comes to business instruction, but actually has a larger impact. We have seen the industry gain traction to the point where we're reaching a certain level of market saturation. And so it's not enough just to be offering the service any longer. Now we have to start playing with the different levels that allow one to stand apart, even though we're all working with the same tool set. And so as business owners, it's helpful for us to know the rules of the subconscious mind or how the subconscious mind operates. We have to play on both, but if you're just focusing on facts, if you're just focusing on logic, then you're missing a huge part of the opportunity. And also, we can use the subconscious mind to make the factual and logical experience better in a number of different ways.
Yeah. And so the intention of this podcast, again, it's going to be sort of an informal recording of Sarah and I just riffing and going deeper on buyer psychology and the drivers that people have to, first of all, live, but that translates then into purchasing. When you're selling anything, you are still playing with the same laws that everything else is playing with. And so the psychology behind buyers is absolutely fascinating to us. And so that's what we're riffing on today.
Yes. And I thought this podcast was an important topic because we still have a couple seats left in our Nashville workshop. It's entirely possible that people are just like, it's Monday, can't make it. But maybe there are people out there who have a couple more questions as to why is this important? How would this even benefit my business? What is buyer psychology even? And why is there an entire day being built around it? This podcast is going to answer that. And so you want logic? We got that. But this workshop is going to help people differentiate themselves from every other mobile bar in the industry because we're going to teach the psychological forces that are also in play that might be being overlooked and will help you stand out from the competition.
Your logical mind that's listening to this right now, the one you use to make decisions that are new to you, that part of your brain processes information at about 2,000 bits per second. Okay. The subconscious mind processes information at 400 billion bits per second. I mean, that's huge. And guys, that unconscious mind is what drives you to get coffee every morning without thinking about it. If you've ever taken a drive home and you get home and you're like, how did I get here? Right? That's because the unconscious mind took over. It already had a pattern for that. And so we're going to dive a little deeper into this delicious topic today.
I think you and I could both live here like permanently. We could have an entire different podcast where we just talk about the many different facets and opportunities that we see in the world where our subconscious versus our conscious mind. I am speaking English with my unconscious mind. It is system one. If you've ever read Thinking Fast or Slow, he talks about system one and system two. That is the terms for your subconscious and your conscious mind in psychology. And your conscious mind takes up a ton of resources. It is very arduous for your conscious mind to process things. It's very slow. And honestly, we're very efficient beings. So we use the conscious mind as little as possible. And we pass off as much as we can to the subconscious, unconscious. I'm using those interchangeably. They may have slightly different meanings, but bear with me. So we pass off as much as we can to our subconscious mind. It's more efficient. It's on autopilot. It has its own neural networks. Anytime you're doing something with your conscious mind, you're working against your pre-formed neural networks. And that's why it's so hard to break a pattern. It's so hard to break a habit. It's because you're actually rewiring your brain to do that. Pretty much anybody, first of all, that does this work comes at it from evolutionary biology. And it'd be silly for them not to, because our brains didn't just appear one day, right? They evolve to be what they are today, which is, and this is not hyperbole, the greatest supercomputer in the universe. One of my favorite quotes throughout my studies is that the brain didn't evolve to be logical, it evolved to be clever, which is often not logical. I love that quote so much because if we can think of it like that, especially when we're trying to answer the question of what do our clients want and what will our clients buy and how should I form this experience for the client, we oftentimes see people do things like bullet pointed lists. I've been railing on those for the past couple of months, right? Bullet pointed lists as a way of describing what you're selling. That is logical. It's absolutely logical. And it's unsexy as hell. Nobody likes a bullet pointed list when they're trying to make an emotional decision, right? We want storytelling. We know this. The human brain has evolved to prefer storytelling. I mean, Hollywood exists merely because we have a fascination as humans with storytelling. And so, if you have the option of reading a bullet pointed list or hear someone tell you a delicious story about what it would look like or be like to have a mobile bar at your event, we are emotional decision makers. So even if our logic brain is saying, but this has everything that we need and it's $100 cheaper, you're going to buy the story every time, even if the bullet pointed list is the same or cheaper. That's a small example of the power of the subconscious brain that we oftentimes overlook in business because it's safer for us to say, but I did the logical thing.
I heard once that the conscious mind lives behind the eyes and it's everything from the eyes up. It kind of gives you the iceberg effect. And that the subconscious mind lives from the eyeballs down. Bro, that's your whole body though. Like that's your whole being, right? And so it's quite literally the intelligence of the throat, the heart, the gut, the sacral, and the root. And so you have to give credit to the intelligence that keeps your heart beating every day. Because if I handed it to your logical brain, right? If I was like, hey, it's now your responsibility to keep your heart beating, you would die. It would not take very long for your conscious mind to like glitch out. First of all, you'd be anxiety ridden. Like anxiety is birthed from the conscious mind attempting to control that which it has no control over because your conscious mind can't process that amount of information. But there is another informational system that keeps your heart beating, it keeps you breathing. And that informational system is everything below the conscious mind, subconscious, right? Below the consciousness. And tapping into that is how we can create a plethora of emotions. It's how we can move people to want to work with us, as opposed to just, I'm here, I have a rig, I have insurance. Okay, cool. Instead, we're going to tell you a story about how impressed your friends will be when they show up to your event and you have this incredible and odd experience for them, right? And then you're creating an allure. You're calling on something that is below the eyeballs. That's the magic of what we're talking about here. And you can call it magic if you want, but your heart is beating. You have proof of that.
Yeah, your conscious brain does not like to do hard work. But you don't like to do hard work. And your conscious brain is the one that's like, fine, I'll do it until it becomes ritual or routine. And then the subconscious brain will take it over. And so if you had to beat your own heart, which you can slow your own heart rate through practices like mindfulness, deep breathing, right? So that we can consciously impact our biological systems. But for how long? Because it wouldn't take very long for your conscious brain to suddenly start worrying about what are you going to have for dinner? Like we've all tried to meditate, right? And it only takes like a hot minute before we're on to something else. And we're like, damn it, bring our attention back. Thank God you weren't in control of your heartbeat at that moment, right? You wouldn't be meditating for very long. You'd be dead. And so I love this brief introduction to kind of the conscious versus the unconscious. And in relation to what we are going to be teaching in Nashville, May 6th, we are going to be looking at every single client touch point that you have and intentionally creating the experience that you want your client to have on both a conscious and a subconscious level. And if we can intentionally Craft the client experience from both of those angles. You will be untouchable. You will be untouchable because people will have literally no idea how it will look like magic. It will look like magic. And magic is anything that's not quite fully understood. And not many people understand buyer psychology. And even if you do, I'm going to tell you another story. I already told you, Dawn, but I'm going to tell the audience this other story. I know buyer psychology. I've been studying it deeply, right? But when you see it in action, you can't help but be like, chef's kiss. Okay. So we've been reading about luxury. Obviously, we're talking about buyer psychology here, which there's a lot of intermingling play between luxury and buyer psychology. And I went to Savannah this past week, and I've been meaning to get new running shoes. So we're walking down one of the streets in Savannah, and I see a shoe store. And it was like one of those old looking shoe stores that had like the giant windows in the front, and they had like all the shoes being presented in the front. And so I go in, and immediately this woman comes up to me. She's like, "Hi, I'm T. Welcome to Globes. We've been around for 100 and something years. We're a full service shoe store. What brings you in today?" And I'm like, "Okay, I feel like a guest. I'm welcome here." So already, just from walking in the door, she is playing on psychology. She introduced me. She told me a little bit about the place. She acknowledged my needs, and she is of service. I tell her I'm a runner, I need new shoes. And I saw that they had running shoes. She's like, "Follow us right this way." So she sits me down, and immediately she's asking me, "What kind of colors do you like? What kind of runner are you?" So I tell her, I give her a bunch of information. I have narrow feet, and I am a road runner. So when I tell her I have a narrow foot, she goes, "We specialize in narrow feet." Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but at this point, it doesn't even matter because now I know that she knows about me, right? And I know that she's going to make suggestions that are applicable and relevant. And so over the course of this conversation, she's talking to my girls, and she's making comments about like, "Oh, you look like an athlete." My daughter, she was wearing like sports shoes or whatever. And she's like, "Yeah, I play soccer." She's like, "Oh, that's amazing. Well, your feet look almost as big as your mother's feet." And I was like, "She's a size 4." And she's like, "That means she's a size 6 in women's." And I'm like, "What? I had no idea that my small child could wear women's shoes." And she's like, "Yeah." And she brings a shoe over for my daughter to try. No pressure for my daughter to buy these shoes, but she just was like, "Oh, an experience." And then she looked over at my other daughter. She's like, "She's got narrow feet like you. That'll be important for you when you start to buy shoes for her." All of these things, right? And every single thing she did was a psychological trick. Her loving on my children made me love her more because inherently we want everybody to love our children. Her giving me information that's relevant to their development makes me trust her more. And her suggestions over the course of trying on the shoes, she's setting the expectation. She's like, "I don't expect you to like all of these shoes. There will be a clear winner. I'm having you try all of these shoes so that you know yourself what's most comfortable." I don't know about you, but I don't usually shop that way. I go in, I look at a shoe I like, I try it on. If it feels good, I'm out of there. I learned I've been buying shoes that are too small. She showed me like this is how, you're supposed to size your foot. That's probably why your feet hurt in your other shoes. She had me skip around the store. She's like, "No, you got to use them." She made me try both of the shoes on for every single pair, and she told me why that was really important. And so I walked out of there paying full price happily. Happily. I would literally, next time I'm in Savannah, I will go buy shoes at this shoe store because the experience was so awesome. And I know every single one of those psychological tricks that she was playing. I call them tricks, they're tactics, whatever. And they still work. They still work. You know what I mean? And so that's the real beauty of this. It's not magic in the fact that like once you know it exists, it's no longer magic. It's still magic. Even once you know what they're doing, it's still effective. And at the workshop, we're going to instill the understanding, ideally, of the different psychological levers that we have at play. And earlier, I listed a number of those, the human desires that we can play on. And we can just briefly go over them so that people who listen to this take away something tangible, which is ultimately my goal with most things. The first one that we can talk about here is autonomy or self-regulation. And the way that I have read this particular one in books is freedom of choice. So if people don't have options, they will inherently dislike whatever it is. If they have an option, they may still pick what you would have wanted to make mandatory, but they will feel less bad about it. They will feel as though they had a choice. And so it's important that we allow people to have autonomy, self-regulation. You and I always refer to this as sovereignty. And so in all of your systems, we want to make sure that you are allowing the client to maintain sovereignty. Now, sometimes that just means like your option is that you don't work with me. Like, but that's still an option, right? And so when we have really strict cancellation policies, and we fail to give people the sense that they have a way out, this can trigger that desire for sovereignty, autonomy, self-regulation.
The archetype for this is the king. And so when you think about interacting with a client, you want to make them feel like king. And because we're in the service industry, it is really easy to do this, to sort of elevate them and put them on a pedestal while also maintaining your own sovereignty. We talked, I don't remember what podcast it was that we touched on this in, but you don't want to usurp your own power to give someone else power. That's not true power. That's a victim bully relationship, and it feels icky and sticky and bleh. Instead, two kings can exist simultaneously, and it comes through respect, through mutual honor. And so giving them the choice helps them feel like king, even if those choices are, to your point, predetermined. But there are other ways that you can put someone else in their king. And the first way and the most important way is to be in yours. Because if you're not familiar with what it feels like to be in the king, to be in the sovereign, you can't ever hope to convey that to another being.
Absolutely. When we say a confused mind doesn't buy, that lives here. This is the autonomy, self-regulation. And so while we're saying give them choices, we also want to have our own crown on and not give them too many choices. So we want to give them options. We don't want them to be overwhelmed. I listened to, I think it was a TikTok, and it was about someone was asking Michelle Obama why she didn't want to run for president. And she's like, well, one, you have to want the job, and I don't. And two, I'm not smart enough. And she goes on to clarify that the king, in this case, the president, but like that's the archetype that we're talking about here, has advisors, but they may have 5 advisors telling them different things. And then that person with all of the stress on their shoulders has to make the right decision. And we want to avoid that. We want to give people ideal options and make it clear how they differentiate between them, but we still want to provide them with options so that they maintain autonomy and self-regulation and sovereignty over their experience. And on that, very similarly, another thing here is ease. Now, I've talked a number of times throughout this podcast about how the human brain is lazy. And so we are going to seek out easy solutions, but we are also inherently untrustworthy of things that are too easy. If it seems too good to be true, it probably is. There's actually science to show that if a medicine is too easy to take, people won't finish the regimen. And so adding a touch of complexity to a regimen of medicine actually increases the likelihood that people will, one, believe in its efficacy, and two, that they will finish the course of medicine. One of the studies that I think maybe Rory Sutherland used this one, but I can't really remember. He said that if there was a course of 20 pills, if you made the last 5 pills red and told them they had to take the white ones first, that they're more likely to finish. And if you've ever taken the birth control pill, that last week is a different color. That's why. Those are placebo pills. They don't really do anything anyways, but you're more likely to take all of them if the last few are a different color for some reason. Subconsciously, we want things to be easy, but not too easy. And so when we're creating processes and when we're creating experiences for our clients, we want them to be easy, but not effortless. They're the way that we see this in business that you and I kind of sometimes talk about. And maybe this one plays into value a little bit as well, but we want things to be slightly uncomfortable for people if it's going to be of value to them. If we were talking about pricing, if it's a coaching container, we tend to want it to be slightly uncomfortable because then they'll show up, right? I had one of our accelerator members is super good at checking in and checking out, and she's so thoughtful that I actually mentioned it to her that how impressed I was at how thoughtful that she is with her check-in and check-outs. And she said, listen, when you invest at this level in your business, you need to show up and make the most of it. And I'm like, yes, ma'am, you do. But a lot of people don't. But that's one of the reasons why I have the check-in and check-out is because it creates effort, right? It creates the opportunity for you to utilize effort to work on your business. And how many times have you blown it through a week and been like, geez, did I work on my business at all this week, or was I just working in it? Right. And so having these intentional markers throughout the experience and the investment where you're being asked to work on your business, and it creates a little bit more effort. You have to slow down. You have to think about your week. You have to tell me what went well, what went poorly, and what, you learn to do differently. That is effortful, right? But it's not hard. It's easy, but effortful.
This is the archetype of sacrifice, right? And so this is biblical. Like this goes way back. The idea of sacrificing something that you love. The word sacrifice in etymology comes from Latin and it means to make sacred. And so when we have to sacrifice something we love for something else, that something else then holds more value for us. And so anytime you're asking people for a level of sacrifice that creates that discomfort, that then is more valuable to them versus, if you said to me, Dawn, you'll have to give up tomato juice for a week if you want this. I would be like, done. And then I wouldn't show up because I don't drink tomato juice. You know what I mean? But if you said to me, Dawn, you have to give up Topo Chico for a week for this, I'm going to be there with bells on because Topo Chico is my lifeblood.
We see this in mobile bars, for example, through our contact form. So we don't want to create too much friction in the lead funnel, but we do want to make sure that there's some friction, right? And so by requiring people to fill out a contact form, they're demonstrating that they're willing to like jump over a small little hurdle in order to get the information that they want. But we want to be intentional with these points of effort, which again, we'll talk about in Nashville. So the next one we should just slip right into is value. And there was a quote in the Alchemy book by Rory Sutherland that I want to highlight here because it is just, I literally highlighted it, but it says, people don't want low prices. They want concrete savings. And I think this is important for us to recognize or realize because oftentimes we think that we're being affordable. And what it does is it devalues your service. And the key here is that if you are always priced lowly, and he actually talks about the case study about how the death of Macy's and JCPenney's was when they decided that they didn't want to be the type of company that issued coupons all the time. And because they had already established themselves as the type of place where you would go to JCPenney's or Macy's when you had a coupon. And they're like, but we don't want that behavior. So they stopped doing that and people stopped going. They just lowered their prices. They were just like, well, we don't want to be the coupon people. We're just going to make them permanently low. And nobody wanted that. Like, yes, it's the same price, but psychologically, I don't feel like I'm getting a value anymore. I don't want low prices. I want concrete savings. I want to feel like I'm getting more for my investment. The other thing about value is that it's sometimes hard to know what people value because people will value different things. Sometimes people value an experience. Sometimes they value the lowest price. Sometimes they value the highest price. But knowing your client and your ideal client helps narrow this down. And obviously, we're going to do that work in Nashville is to like, let's talk about your ideal client. What do they value? And that doesn't mean that those are the only people that are going to book you, obviously. But when you're talking very specifically to a value set, everything else becomes a little bit easier. So the next one that I want to talk about here is belonging. And we're pack animals. And so this one is probably one of the most deeply rooted desires for people. It comes in the form of community. It comes in the form of being understood, like religion, for example. I was just riffing on this with my girls because we don't go to church and we live in the South. And so that's obviously a thing they get questioned by everybody, including their friends. And so they were asking questions about religion and why people react the way they do when they find out that they don't go to church. And so I was talking to them about what my personal perspective of religion is. And I think above and beyond all other things, it's about the community. It's about the sense of belonging and not just having a place to show up. But when you are labeled, let's say Baptist, for example, you go into that church with a baseline understanding of the rules, of what the beliefs are, of how to show up successfully, potentially how to dress, what to eat. And so you have a better sense, a deeper sense of belonging because you can identify that label with a list of understanding of how to succeed there. And that sense of belonging is so ingrained in us as humans that we create little micro communities around things. There's cult followings to clothing brands and TV shows. I'm a Ted Lasso fan. You know what I mean? And so if like I meet another person who's like, I hate Ted Lasso, I'm like, whoa, we don't belong together. Right. Because I know a little bit more about your values now that you mentioned that. And so when we can build a brand that instills belonging amongst our ideal clients, you're much more likely to build a successful brand.
This is actually an industry advantage that we have at Mobile Bev Pros, right? Because business coaches are a dime a dozen. Like you could throw a rock and hit 12 business coaches, you know what I mean? And so why do people come to MBP? Because they belong here, because this isn't just generalized business. It is for mobile beverage business owners. And so they're all talking about hot chocolate and chai tea and the perfect cocktail. There's a sense of belonging in that. And so I think you said that beautifully.
When we talk about the riches are in the niches, this is what we're talking about. If you can pull a thread that ties everybody together that you're aiming to serve with your business, you have the opportunity to build a community and a sense of belonging. And however deep you think you're going, you can always go deeper. I was just talking to you the other day that like we have mobile bars as our niche, but like we could go deeper. We could serve just tap trucks. We could serve just people without rigs or just people with rigs. We could serve just lemonade stands and we could keep going deeper. Now, we're not doing that, but that's what we mean by the riches are in the niches, because the deeper you go, the stronger the sense of belonging that people have. So if you have a mobile bar service out there, one opportunity that you have when it comes to belonging is to specialize in something. I just went to a networking event and they had a sober bar there. Now we're seeing more sober bars pop up.
We actually see a lot of people who want to niche and they feel intuitively that they should niche. And this actually happened with a sober mobile bar owner. And we were like, you should go all in because those are getting hot right now. And she could not do it. It's very uncomfortable to niche because you feel like you're pigeonholing yourself. You feel like, well, if I'm not for everybody, then who's going to pay me? And so it can be really terrifying to niche. And when I'm looking for a sober mobile bar experience, you would be my go-to. But because you didn't tell me that's what you were or that you could serve me that way, now I don't know. And so now I'm going to have to go with someone else. And so it's incredibly powerful to niche. And this is the other thing that I would touch on for psychological or metaphysical hacks. The more powerful a thing is, the more terrifying that thing is, right? And so the more condensed your messaging, the more potent it is to your ideal client. But the scarier it feels for you to put that very specific messaging out into the world. That's why I always love to say that like fear is a great indicator that you're on the right path. You're on the path to growth, right?
I love that you brought that up because I actually did go and talk to this mobile bar owner. I recommended the podcast, so maybe she'll be listening to this right now. But over the course of the conversation, I mentioned that I was a mobile bar coach, which she thought was like kind of crazy because she didn't even know those things existed. And I told her that I used to own Bar Magnolia, and she goes, "Oh my gosh, you are one of the companies that I looked at when doing my market research to start the Sober Bar. And I almost didn't start it because you also do mocktails. And so why would anybody pick me over you? You've already got an amazing established brand." And I gave her the same riff. I said, because if you specialized in mocktails, somebody would trust your mocktails over mine because that's all you do versus what I do includes mocktails. But there's an inherent understanding in the human psyche that if you do all the things, you do none of them as well. And I say this all the time about software, but it's also one of those things where we just inherently feel like if you do all the things, you're probably only kind of good at all of them, right? And so if you specialize in mocktails, if they're looking for mocktails, they're likely going to choose the brand that specializes in that thing. When we go to a doctor, we don't generally have our family doctor do neurosurgery, right? Like we're going to have a neurosurgeon because they specialize in that. When we talk about the riches are in the niches, there's a whole lot of psychology that goes into play when it comes to going all in on a thing and how much trust you're able to generate and how much belonging and community you're able to generate when you have a specialization. The next one that I have, there's three left: growth and development. It is my theory that inherently we can't help ourselves from wanting to grow and develop. Now, we grow physically only until we're about 15 to 22, depending on your gender, but emotionally, we're always growing. Intellectually, we're always growing. Relationally, we're always growing. And sometimes this shows up in our businesses. Like, I want to make more money. I want to be, a CEO. I want to open and grow in more cities. Sometimes this looks like a deepening instead of a widening, whether it's in our knowledge of a thing. As someone who can easily hyperfixate on something, I, may teach myself to cross stitch, and that's all I'll do for 2 months. And I'll just learn how to cross stitch because I like learning new things. When it comes to growth and development from a business standpoint, from a client perspective, we see this look like dreams, aspirations. In the mobile bar space, we're going to see somebody demonstrate their desire for growth by wanting experiences. Experiences are opportunities for growth and learning. And sometimes that growth looks like increasing your status. There's certainly a subset of people out there that host weddings, corporate events, because they're trying to be showy and they're trying to impress their comrades or their family or their friends and increase their status. And so that's growth of status. And sometimes it's that they've been dreaming about their wedding since they were a small girl. And this dream of achieving that thing is being experienced, and you are part of that with the bar experience. So we can play very much towards the desire for aspirations, growth, and development in our marketing and in how we show up for our clients.
Yeah, and when a thing stops growing, it starts dying. Mother Nature teaches us that. Once it's done growing, it starts dying. And we see this with people that we know who get stuck in their subconscious patterns. They get stuck in a habitual state. And as we get older, the brain starts to lack neuroplasticity because it hasn't been exercised. It doesn't have to be that way. There are many people in their 70s, 80s who have maintained a beautiful plasticity because they continue to exercise that muscle, learn new things. But we all know someone who's like really rigid in their beliefs, in their thought systems, and it's hard to have conversations or to relate with those people because they get stuck in a certain time period in their lives or in the eras of the earth, and they stop growing. And you'll see that your drive to hang out with those people starts to die, right? Like you don't want to be around people who aren't growing. And so even when we get meditative and we talk about the metaphysical, it's important that we use active magic, passive magic, and neutral magic, right? Active is like you're going out, you're growing, you're exploring, you're doing the thing. Passive is where you're intaking. And so to learn a new thing, you have to read a book. That's consumption, right? And then neutral is that space. It's meditation, is really the only way you can do this, is where you just stop. You're not consuming anything. You're also not transmitting anything or taking any action, putting anything out into the world. And in that space, you have opportunity to reflect, to imagine, to be still, and to be present, but only for the purpose of one, growing your consciousness, because that's what the neutral state does. Or two, coming out of that state and continuing the passive and the active magics at higher degrees.
Rory actually talks about that in the end of this book, which I thought you would love. He's like, I wrote 80% of the pages for this book a day after I did absolutely nothing, and how important it is to the alchemical process to leave space for not doing shit. And like we see that everywhere. Obviously, I'm preaching to the choir there, but from an alchemical standpoint, growth requires dormancy. It just does.
Yeah, and if you're listening and you're like, "What is alchemy?" Like, because we might have some people on the podcast who are like, what? You and I tend to move pretty quickly because we've been doing this for a long time, right? Alchemy is just a state of transmutation or transformation. So, a transforming of thought pattern, a transforming of habits, a transforming of a service. And so, the wedding that you're going to be serving at, the alchemical opportunity for you is that you transform the service of the bar experience, right? And so, anything that is transformation is essentially alchemy. And that can be anything from shifting your perspective about a thing that then changes how you interact with that thing to actually changing the physical properties of a thing.
Probably an important clarification there. Okay, second to last one, procreation. Now, as biological beings, we have evolved with a deep-seated desire to make more of ourselves. And we do that through a sexual process. Now, I named this workshop Sexy Selling to draw that dichotomy. Like, we want to obviously be the most attractive option for clients, and there's sex appeal in that. Now, this isn't something that you can turn on or off. We are inherently attracted to things, and we are inherently repulsed by things. And, we've talked about that in the last couple of podcasts, in that if you're turning no one on, you're turning no one off. If you're turning no one off, you're turning no one on. And so that's an important part of just being a biological entity. There's no reason to avoid that when talking about business. It is just a part of who we are. And so we can use a lot of the same techniques and tactics that you would to woo an individual to date you. Lastly, we'll come to the core human desire that you often will hear me talk about in a variety of different ways, because it is the foundation of everything that we do, including know, like, and trust, and that is safety. We as human beings need to feel safe, whether we're going to spend money, whether we're going to invest our energy or attention in something. We need to have a baseline sense of safety. When we're creating client experiences, this might look like being very clear and transparent about communicating what people need to do. If you enter into an engagement and you have no idea how to show up or what success looks like or who's going to do what, you don't feel safe. And so being clear throughout the client experience as to what you want people to know and do at every step is an important part of the client journey that we're going to be talking about in Nashville. The other thing that I want to mention here that I think is somewhat not necessarily unique to our industry, but comes into play is that, and you and I have actually talked about this because this is a trigger for you, is an assurance that you won't get into trouble. If someone feels like there's an opportunity for them to get into trouble, that can be very triggering. So in our industry, we can alleviate that fear because it's a controlled substance that we're serving, and there's a lot of laws around it. And so you might get that client that's like, we want to serve alcohol. We don't know how to do it legally. We don't know how this works. What permits do we need? There might be a whole lot of anxiety around that because they don't want to do it wrong. With some people, this is stronger than others. I have a little bit more of, you got to catch me first mentality around getting in trouble, which, we've talked about specifically around like money. The IRS does not scare me. I've taken the IRS to court and won, you know what I mean? But a lot of people are terrified by the IRS. And so there are certain baseline levels of safety that we play with when it comes to psychology that are important in the client experience.
This is formed, all of these really are formed in the subconscious in the first 7 years of your life, where you are primarily in the theta state, your mirror neurons are working. And so you are becoming a reflection of your parental figures or whoever is bringing you up, whether it's potentially you're in a daycare or whatever. But those first 7 years are critical to the development of the psyche. So, how you interact with safety is very much how you interacted with your parents. And so, because of the traumatic upbringing I experienced prior to 7 years old, I have a huge aversion to trouble. And so the IRS is like my stepfather, and I don't want to piss them off. Do you know what I mean? And so that's something I get to work on. But what you can take away from this is that it comes through in a very tangible way. We have people often who want to join the Mobile Bar Academy, and they'll ask us, is this a contract or is it cancel anytime? That question for us demonstrates to me that you're concerned about the safety of this container. What happens if 1 month I don't have this investment? Are you gonna like put me into collections, right? Because I don't have the rest of this investment. And so to put their mind at ease, we tell them, we would love for you to spend a year in here because that's going to help you afford the academy 100 times over. But it is cancel at any time, right? And that just gives them a sense of safety, a sense of security.
Yes, and so when we developed our policies around this, we consciously considered safety. We didn't want people to feel like they were locked in. I'm not sending anyone to collections. And we've both worked with coaches who have been very aggressive about you get into a container and it's not what you expected and you don't necessarily want it anymore. And suddenly you're being hounded for the $79 a month. And you're like, I don't want it. And they're like, too bad, no cancellations. Now you need to pay for 12 months for a thing that you don't want. Like that feels yucky, gross, and unsafe. Right. And so we were very intentional when creating our entire client journey to ensure that people felt safe. And so we've done that in a number of different ways. One, cancel at any time. Could we make that a 1 year contract? We do for our accelerator, but that's more from a perspective of we do a lot of upfront work with the accelerator, but we want to give people longer payment plans. But with the academy, we say you need a year, you can cancel at any time. We also have the opportunity for in-person support if you need. We have weekly Q&A calls. And that's again because people are like, what if I get in there and I don't know where to go? What if I don't understand a thing? What if I have a question? Right? So, oh, you're safe. We have a real person that me, a matter of fact, that works with you every week. You have the opportunity. You can email at any time too, and we'll respond to you. Right. And so like all of the client touch points were intentionally designed to hit the safety marker because we know how unsafe entrepreneurship is. Your chances of failing in entrepreneurship are very high. There's nothing safe about starting your own business at any point. It could go at any time. The market could shift. We talked about that in the last episode. COVID could happen and shut your business down like, like it did back in 2020. There's really nothing safe, but there really is not, any guaranteed safety anywhere, but there's inherently a sense of increased danger with entrepreneurship. And so we are intentional about trying to ensure that people feel like their investment is safe. And the other way that we do that is we create and provide an intense amount of value. And we see that through we still have people that will tell us, I'm not sure how I would have done it without you. I mean, I don't want to toot my own horn, but I do want to mention that we intentionally create value within the academy so that people feel safe investing with us. And so that's why oftentimes people will join the academy and then they'll upgrade to the accelerator because they were testing with the academy as to whether they could trust, right? And we try very much to make people feel like their investment, their time, and their resources are safe in our stewardship.
The beautiful thing about this that I didn't realize when we first started talking is that safety really holds hands with sacrifice or risk because you don't want to make people feel unsafe, but you still have to get them to sacrifice enough to be slightly uncomfortable, right? And so that's like a very nuanced line that you want to tread delicately, but in mastery, that line becomes potentially your greatest asset in business is making people feel safe while also being able to make them just uncomfortable enough to create real change in their lives. Alchemy, real change in how they perceive you or how they perceive your services.
I'm so glad you said that because I had another one scratched in the margins here that I didn't originally list that I think is a really important lever that we utilize and that we can utilize when we're building out these client experiences. And that is affirmation. And when I mean affirmation, I don't mean I am strong, I am beautiful, I am smart. I mean affirming that they are nailing it. How often do you have someone out there in the world being like, you are crushing it, right? Not enough. And so if the companies that we work with, and my shoe story is a great example of this, she thanked me a million times and she's like, "You're gonna love these shoes. These shoes are gonna be so good for you, and you're gonna have people literally walking down the street and, identifying with you because they're called On Clouds. I don't even know what they are, but apparently there's like a little cult following to this type of shoe." And her affirmation that I made a good decision and that it was a good investment, I mean, of course she's gonna say that, but my subconscious brain still wanted to hear it. They still wanted to hear it. And so we have the opportunity in our client journeys to create opportunities for affirmation that they are nailing it. What a great decision. You have great taste in event bars. This is a delicious cocktail. Your guests are gonna love it. We'll bring a full water, tea, and lemonade station. That way people are well hydrated. They just wanna know that they're doing something right in the world.
Bonus points if you can play on the affirmations that they are secretly seeking from their caregivers or parents from 0 to 7, right? And so you can get pretty deep with all this psychological stuff. It goes really deep and delicious. But this has been an absolutely awesome podcast, and I love that we wove a little bit of our behind the scenes magic into it, and I hope that our listeners fall in love with these riffings the way that you and I do. Talk about a niche within a niche.
Yeah, absolutely. If anything that we talked about today resonates with you and you want more of this magic in your client experience and in your business, do not hesitate. Do not wait. Buy your ticket to the full day workshop in Nashville, May 6th, and it's going to be a great time.
Awesome.
And that wraps up today's episode. I hope it was valuable. I would love to hear from you what you thought. You can drop me a line at hello@mobilebevpros.com or find me on Instagram at mobilebevpros. If you're looking for more valuable mobile bar related content, we have a website full of it. You can find us at www.mobilebevpros.com. And I'd love to see you in our Facebook community, also by the name of, you guessed it, Mobile Bev Pros. Thank you for joining me today, and until next time, cheers.